In just the past few months, we've had some big trades go down in the NBA. Damian Lillard, Drew Holiday, James Harden. In this video, I'm going to talk about the next group of players who I believe will be traded this season that could have an impact on the teams they go to come playoff time. Getting right into this, the first player that I have on my list was somebody I thought was going to be traded at last year's NBA deadline. It didn't happen, but I think this year is the year it will happen. That player is the Chicago Bulls' DeMar DeRozan. I've talked about the Chicago Bulls situation in other videos, so I won't get into all of it right now. But basically, Chicago is stuck in that no man's land, middle of the NBA, where they're not good enough to compete with the top teams, but they're also not bad enough that they're getting quality draft picks and drafting players that you can build your future around. I think this is the year that they're really going to have to make the big decisions. And I do believe Chicago will go into somewhat of a rebuild or a retooling of their roster. And for Chicago, I think it just makes sense that DeMar DeRozan be the first domino that falls in that rebuild. DeRozan is currently playing this year on an expiring contract, meaning he will be a free agent this summer. There's really no signs pointing to that DeRozan has any plans to re-sign with Chicago in the summer. It's a simple situation of either we trade him now this year and maybe get something back for him, or let the season ride out, see what may happen. But there's a big chance that we may lose him in free agency for nothing. Come January, February time, I would not be surprised to hear DeMar DeRozan's name being shopped around, being thrown out in trade talk. I do think DeRozan is a player that other contending teams will take a look at and will be willing to give up valuable assets for, feeling that DeRozan is the final piece that may get them to a championship run. Contending teams like the Los Angeles Lakers, Miami Heat, I think a player like DeRozan will definitely pique their interest. I do believe DeMar DeRozan will finish the year on a new team. Moving on to the next two players I'm going to talk about. I'm going to mention them together because they come from the same organization. It's an organization that is in a somewhat similar situation to the Chicago Bulls, stuck in that no man's land, middle ground in the NBA. And that team is the Toronto Raptors. And those two players are actually the last relics of that 2019 championship team, Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. These are two players whose names have been in trade talks for, it seems like, the last year and a half. I think this is the season that Toronto will finally turn the page, move in a new direction, and build around Scotty Barnes. OG Anunoby, like DeRozan, is playing on an expiring contract, and there's already rumors swirling around that he has no plans to sign with Toronto in the summer. So I think it's definitely a trade him for something or lose him for nothing situation. I think come February, OG Anunoby will be on a new team. And Pascal Siakam has really been the face of the Toronto Raptors organization since Kawhi Leonard left and went to LA. And while Siakam's had really good years and had all-star level play, I think it's reached a point where things have just ran their course in Toronto, and I think they're ready to look in a new direction, build a new core around Scotty Barnes, build through the draft, get some new young players in, and move forward into a new era of Toronto Raptors basketball, going into a rebuild, which could mean having some bad years, some losing seasons, and Toronto rebuilding will probably be okay with that. But Siakam looks like he still has a few more years of being a very productive player in the league. I have a feeling he'd rather spend those years on a contending team looking to challenge for a championship than playing in an organization that's rebuilding and probably going to be losing a lot of games. Toronto tears it down. OG Anunoby gone. Pascal Siakam gone. Two players I'm going to talk about also come from the same organization. This organization is already in full rebuild mode, and since they are rebuilding, I think they will be willing to trade these players out in order to get future assets, whether that's draft capital or a couple of good young players. And those two players are Jeremy Grant and Malcolm Brogdon of the Portland Trail Blazers. Portland's trade of Damian Lillard in the summer officially put them into full rebuild mode. They're obviously looking to build around Sharp and Simons and Scoot, continuing to build through the draft. They are obviously playing and making moves with the future in mind and not necessarily winning for right now. That's the reason why I believe they will be willing to give up Grant and Brogdon. They're both productive players that other teams in the league are going to want, and they're going to be willing to give up valuable assets for. And at the same time, they're players that don't necessarily fit their plans for the future. So I do believe Portland will shop Grant and Brogdon, see what they can get back in return. And if a package comes back that they like, especially if it has draft capital or young players, I wouldn't be surprised if they take it. Brogdon and Grant are out of Portland. This last one's going to be a bit of a wild card. Right now, there's absolutely no talk of this guy getting traded. But once the NBA trade deadline rolls around, I wouldn't be surprised to hear his name in some trade rumors, and eventually he may be dealt. That is the Utah Jazz, Jordan Clarkson. All right, to explain this, I want to rewind back to the beginning of last season. The Utah Jazz had just traded away Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. It looked like they were going into a complete rebuild, full tank mode. Everybody was predicting Utah was going to be one of the bottom 3 teams in the league last year. And the season starts, and all of a sudden, they're pretty damn good. I believe at one point last season, they were sitting at either first or second in the West. Now, the second half of the year, they definitely leveled off a bit, but they did make it to the play-in games, and for a team that was supposed to be a bottom 3 team in the league, that's a pretty successful season. However, in just the first 2 weeks of this season, they're definitely looking more like that bottom 3 team we thought they were going to be last year. I don't think this Utah team is going to get a whole lot of wins this season, especially in a tough Western Conference where most of the teams are all challenging for a playoff spot. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see Utah go back to their original plan of rebuilding, tanking their season. I really think the only 2 players they would not trade away would probably be Lauri Markkanen and Kessler. Other than that, when the mid-season trade deadline rolls around, I wouldn't be surprised if Utah dealt some of their players out. I think Jordan Clarkson is going to be a player that a lot of teams are going to have interest in. I think Utah will continue their rebuild, trade out Jordan Clarkson, maybe Colin Sexton, Olynyk. I believe Jordan Clarkson will be on a new team by February. So that's my list of players I think will be traded this season. Let me know what you guys think. Agree, disagree? Are there any players you think will be traded that I didn't mention? Catch you guys on the next one. I'm out. Peace.